Canada just became much more important to America's military supply chain. China is tightening control over tungsten, a critical metal used in weapons and aerospace systems, while America has no active commercial mine. Now Washington is looking north for an answer. The problem is that the deposit that could help save the US supply chain sits in Canada. Tungsten has become dramatically more expensive as China tightened export controls while global demand from defense, aerospace, manufacturing, and advanced technology kept climbing. The squeeze is documented at the government level. A June 2026 US trade advisory specifically warned of a global supply contraction and price escalation in the tungsten market. That warning came from the Emerging Technology and Research Advisory Committee, a body that advises the US government on strategic materials. When an official advisory flags both shrinking supply and rising prices simultaneously, it signals a market moving from ordinary tightness toward genuine crisis. The pricing itself shows how far the market has already shifted. A 2026 project study was using a tungsten price of roughly $304,000 per ton, a figure that reflects the escalation the trade advisory warned about. Tungsten is not a cheap bulk commodity. It is a specialized strategic metal, and prices at that level make every downstream product built with it more expensive. As China restricts exports and demand keeps rising across multiple industries at once, the price pressure compounds, and buyers who depend on tungsten face costs that keep climbing with each new restriction. Now shift to why Washington is genuinely alarmed. Because tungsten is not just another industrial metal. Its extreme hardness and heat resistance make it essential for military-grade steel, ammunition, armor, aerospace components, and a range of other defense systems. Tungsten can withstand temperatures and stresses that would destroy ordinary metals, which is exactly why it ends up in armor-piercing rounds, missile components, and high-performance aerospace parts. There is no easy substitute. US government assessments have repeatedly warned that tungsten has limited substitutes and that dependence on foreign supply creates a national security vulnerability. That combination, critical military use, plus few alternatives, plus foreign dependence, is what makes a tungsten shortage far more serious than simply paying a higher price. The defense dependency is the core of the problem. A tank's armor, an artillery shell's penetrator, a jet engine's high-temperature components, these depend on tungsten's specific properties. If the supply of tungsten is controlled by a strategic rival, and that rival tightens exports, every weapon system built with the metal carries a hidden vulnerability. The Pentagon cannot simply redesign around tungsten the way a manufacturer might substitute one common metal for another. The physical properties that make tungsten valuable are the same properties that make it irreplaceable in the applications that matter most to defense. This is where Canada becomes strategically important. The biggest Canadian angle is the Mactung project in the Yukon, developed by Fireweed Metals. The Pentagon has already put money behind the project because Mactung is one of the world's largest undeveloped high-grade tungsten deposits. The US Department of Defense made an investment specifically to strengthen the tungsten supply chain, and Mactung is central to that effort. That American money flowing into a Canadian deposit tells the whole story. Washington is looking north because the tungsten it needs is not available at home, and Canada holds one of the few high-grade deposits outside China that could help close the gap. And if you want the real story behind how Canada is still holding its ground through tariffs, wars, and hard times, hit join below to join the membership for exclusive documentaries you won't see anywhere else about Canada's progress and rise through uncertainty. Canada's position in this makes it a linchpin of Washington's attempt to build a North American tungsten supply chain outside China. The story is fundamentally a race. America needs tungsten quickly for weapons production. China controls the dominant global supply chain and is tightening it, and Canada has one of the deposits that could help fill the shortfall. But there is a critical catch. Developing a mine and the processing network around it takes years. Mactung is a deposit, not a producing mine. Turning high-grade ore in the Yukon into finished tungsten products for American defense requires mine construction, processing facilities, and supply chain infrastructure that cannot be built overnight. That timeline gap is the source of the suspense, because the Pentagon's list of realistic options is shrinking. The United States has no active commercial tungsten mines. It is trying to expand recycling and rebuild domestic production. But those efforts take time to scale, and it is looking abroad to allied suppliers, which is why the Pentagon invested in a Canadian project. Fast Markets documented how the United States is effectively bankrolling a worldwide tungsten network, funding projects across allied nations to build supply outside Chinese control. That global effort reflects how few immediate options exist. Washington is not choosing between many suppliers. It is trying to create suppliers where none currently produce at scale. Recent American actions show how seriously Washington is treating the shortage. The United States has moved to target tungsten scrap exports, seeking to keep more of the material inside North America rather than letting it flow overseas. When a government starts restricting the export of scrap metal, it signals genuine anxiety about supply, the recognition that every ton of tungsten leaving the continent is a ton that might be needed for defense production. That policy shift reflects a Pentagon working to conserve every available source of the metal while it waits for new mines like Mactung to come online. The AP reporting on critical minerals connected the tungsten squeeze to the broader geopolitical picture, including the Iran conflict and China's dominance over strategic materials. The context matters. As global tensions rise and defense production demands increase, the competition for materials like tungsten intensifies. China's control over the dominant supply chain becomes a more powerful lever precisely when Western defense needs are growing. That convergence, rising demand, tightening Chinese supply, and few Western alternatives ready to produce, is what has turned tungsten from an obscure industrial input into a national security priority. The Financial Times documented the scramble as Western nations race to secure tungsten supply outside China, underscoring that this is not a uniquely American problem, but a broader Western vulnerability. Allied nations are all competing for the same limited pool of non-Chinese supply, which adds another layer of pressure. Even as Washington funds Canadian and other allied projects, it is doing so in a market where multiple Western defense establishments want the same material. That competition raises prices further and makes deposits like Mactung even more strategically valuable. Canada's role in solving this is significant, but constrained by time. Mactung represents one of the best opportunities outside China to produce high-grade tungsten for the Western defense supply chain. The Pentagon's investment confirms its importance. But the deposit must still be developed into a working mine with processing capacity. And that process takes years, while China's export tightening is happening now. The gap between when America needs the tungsten and when Canadian supply can actually deliver it is the crux of the entire problem. This brings the story to its sharpest question. Tungsten prices are escalating, China is tightening supply, and the United States has no active commercial mine of its own. Canada holds one of the world's largest undeveloped high-grade deposits, and the Pentagon has invested in it, but Mactung will take years to develop into a producing mine. So if Chinese supply keeps tightening before the North American projects are ready, where does the Pentagon get the tungsten it needs for weapons production in the meantime? America is betting on Canada to help close the gap. The unresolved question is whether Canadian supply can arrive before the shortage becomes a crisis Washington cannot manage.